Today, we're tackling a really big question, one that probably resonates whether you're a parent, thinking about becoming one, or, just interested in how we all develop.
Right, the question of what actually helps kids succeed.
Exactly. And there's some new federal data out that's, well, frankly, a bit concerning. It shows American kids are slipping behind in things like reading test scores. And the gap between kids from, let's say, more advantaged backgrounds and those less advantaged seems to be getting wider.
Yeah, that gap is definitely something we need to understand better.
Which brings us to the core question for this deep dive. Is it really all about money? Is that achievement gap just down to financial resources?
That's precisely what we want to dig into. We've been looking at some fascinating material, specifically excerpts from The Science Behind Raising Successful Kids. It features developmental psychologist Ariel Khalil from the University of Chicago on the Big Brains podcast. And our mission today really is to explore the science, which is sometimes surprising, behind how parents influence their kids, looking beyond just the dollars and cents.
So focusing more on the day-to-day stuff, the habits, the interaction.
Exactly. We'll touch on how maybe our own sort of human tendencies might play into parenting choices, and importantly, how some really quite simple interventions can apparently have a huge impact.
Okay, let's get into that, because I think the default assumption for many people is, well, money buys better schools, tutors, lessons, right? That must be the main thing.
Sure, that's the easy assumption. Resources obviously don't hurt.
But Professor Khalil's work, it suggests there's another really significant layer here. What are we talking about? What points beyond just, financial capital?
Well, what's really striking is the focus on the absolute fundamentals of development. Things that don't necessarily cost a lot of money.
Like what?
Think about early language. Those very early, frequent, verbal back and forths, even just simple babbling between a parent and a baby, that stuff is apparently critical.
Critical for what exactly?
Yeah, for actually building the neural pathways for language. And that foundation, the language development piece, is a massive predictor of later cognitive abilities. So it's these consistent early interactions. They lay down essential groundwork.
Okay, so it's less about, say, having the most expensive educational toys and more about the quality of that engagement right from the start.
Precisely. That's what Professor Khalil's research seems to highlight. It's how parents actively engage daily, talking, playing, reading together. These activities seem to be incredibly powerful engines for development.
For cognitive growth, emotional stuff, just the whole package.
Yeah, the whole capacity to learn and thrive. It's all interconnected.
The source material you mentioned talks about the surprising impact of seemingly small interventions. Can you give us a solid example? What's one of these things, and why does it punch above its weight, so to speak?
Okay, a really compelling one is reading aloud, daily.
Just reading a book.
Yeah. The research suggests that finding, say, just 15 minutes a day to read aloud to your child can have this, well, disproportionately large positive effect.
15 minutes? Real?
On their language development, their literacy skills, and then down the line, their academic success. It's a pretty small investment of time, right?
Right.
Doesn't cost much, if anything, but it provides that consistent exposure to richer language, builds comprehension, and hopefully fosters a love of reading, too.
15 minutes. It almost sounds, too simple to make that big a difference. What's actually happening there, like biologically or cognitively?
Well, if you think about it, those 15 minutes, they're not just about the words. It's the shared focus, right? Parent and child looking at the same thing.
Okay.
The child hears language modeled fluently. They learn to follow a story, a narrative structure. And there's even neuroscience suggesting that shared reading can synchronize brain activity.
Desynchronize between the parent and child.
Yeah. In areas linked to language processing and imagination, this kind of synchronous firing is thought to really strengthen those crucial neural connections for learning.
Wow. Okay, so the connection itself, the shared experience, that actually boosts the learning part.
Exactly. And, this connects to something else interesting, how our own thinking, sometimes called behavioral biases, can subtly influence parenting.
How so?
Well, take effort justification. We tend to value things more if we put a lot of effort or money into them.
Right. If it was expensive, it must be good.
Kind of. So that bias might lead some parents to think, maybe subconsciously, that pricey educational gadgets must be better than just sitting down and reading a library book every day, even when the science points to the power of that simple, consistent act.
That's a really interesting point. So if these high-impact things like reading daily are relatively simple and cheap, why do we still see that widening achievement gap we talked about at the start? What gets in the way? Are there, like, common roadblocks or ways of thinking?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's complex. While reading for 15 minutes sounds simple, consistently doing it can be incredibly hard.
Especially if you're stressed, working multiple jobs.
Exactly. Time poverty, high stress levels, those are huge barriers, particularly linked to socioeconomic status. But our own thinking patterns can also trip us up.
Like what?
Like maybe prioritizing activities that look more like formal learning worksheets, flashcards over something like, say, imaginative play.
Oh, play is important too, right?
Hugely important for problem solving, creativity, social skills. But maybe it doesn't always feel as productive to a parent worried about academics, even though it's building crucial foundations.
So it really sounds like Professor Khalil's work is saying, look, resources matter, they provide a foundation, no doubt. But they aren't the only thing, maybe not even the main thing, for certain outcomes. It's this active, consistent parent engagement in these little daily moments that carries enormous weight.
That's a really good way to put it. Resources can definitely open doors, but it's often that consistent parental engagement that determines how well a child actually walks through those doors, what they absorb along the way.
Creating that nurturing, stimulating environment through just regular positive interactions.
That seems to be the core message.
Now, you mentioned the source also touches on technology, AI, behavioral economics. How might they fit into helping parents and maybe tackling this inequality issue?
Yeah, this is a really forward-looking aspect. The potential is there, people think, for AI to offer maybe personalized tips or nudges to parents.
Nudges, like reminders.
Kind of, but maybe smarter. Suggesting age-appropriate activities, perhaps timing reminders for when parents are most likely to be able to engage, framing the benefits in a motivating way.
And behavioral economics helps design those nudges effectively.
Right, by understanding things like optimism bias or present bias, our tendency to focus on now versus later, you could design tools that gently steer parents towards those high-impact daily interactions, making them easier to adopt.
So the idea isn't tech replacing parents, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely not.
It's more about using tech and behavioral insights to sort of empower parents, give them tools and support to make doing these beneficial things more consistent, maybe especially for those facing the biggest hurdles.
That seems to be the hope. Augmenting parenting with smart support systems, helping bridge that gap by making sure more kids get these crucial developmental inputs, regardless of their family's resources.
Okay, so wrapping this up then.
Yeah.
For you listening, the big takeaway seems to be, yes, financial stability matters. Of course it does. But the science is really clear that your everyday interactions, talking, playing, reading with your kids, these things have a massive, maybe underestimated impact on how they develop and their future success.
Absolutely. Even those small, consistent efforts seem to add up to something really significant over time.
And looking ahead, these ideas about using AI and behavioral science to support parents, that's a really interesting space to watch for potentially leveling the playing field a bit.
Definitely holds promise.
So maybe here's the final thought to leave you with. Given how powerful these daily interactions